So hello everyone, you're listening to the Blockchain Socialist podcast. And for today's guest, I have Samer Hassan. He is an activist, researcher, and associate professor at Universidad Complutense Madrid and Harvard. He is working on peer-to-peer models, which is a project that's looking to build collaborative economy organizations that are decentralized, democratic, and distribute their profits. So hi Samer, how are you doing?
Fine. How are you?
I'm good.
Thanks for inviting me here.
Yeah, of course, and thanks for coming on. But maybe as a preface for our conversation, it would be good if you could give an introduction of yourself and explain how you came to the blockchain space and got started on peer-to-peer models, since it's a really interesting project, and I think a lot of listeners would be interested in learning more about it.
Basically, I'm a researcher within academia, right? But I typically define myself more as an activist, typically involved in grassroots initiatives, both offline, online. So when I was back in the day, I studied both computer science and social sciences. And when I was doing my PhD, I typically did my activism on the side, right? Like I would do more academic stuff, write my research publications. Okay, it was interdisciplinary, it was interesting, using AI and social sciences and simulations, and it was cool. But eventually I got sick of not having social impact with the work that I was basically spending my life on. So I spent some time away from academia, actually doing activism in Lebanon or in Spain or whatever. And eventually I came back, but I came back changing fields and trying to mix everything up. So instead of working on communities outside of academia, I tried to study communities within academia. And instead of caring about decentralized tech or platforms for social movements or stuff like that outside of academia, I would research that kind of stuff within academia. So these two lines, studying communities on one hand and building tools relying on free open source centralized technologies on the other, has been what I have been busy for the last, 10, 12 years.
Wow.
So well before blockchain, to be honest.
Yeah. That's great. You're able to mix those two together.
Yeah, sometimes I work on one, sometimes I work on the other, but typically I try to mix the two research lines, which is what has the most potential, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Did your activism include a lot of, did it include a lot of technology, I guess?
So depends on the moment. Sometimes it did. I back in the day, I co-funded a non-profit that we were working on building or supporting software for social movements. But also I have been involved in a social center where I would belong to the, let's say, computer science commission, but I would also do other management, other coordination, going, wiki assemblies and all this stuff, which has nothing to do with technology, right?
The organizing part.
Yes.
Yeah. And so then, I guess, how did you end up coming to the blockchain space?
I was already involved with decentralized tech, so I was, of course, aware of when the Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies started to be something. But I was especially interested when Ethereum began to be on the works, right? Because then it implied to be able to build decentralized applications different than a cryptocurrency, which, to be honest, I don't love Bitcoin model at all.
Yeah,
I think it has so many issues. But I believe that it has potentials. Not the Bitcoin, but the blockchain technology to tackle power imbalances when we build infrastructure, right? That
when you say you were working on decentralized tech before that, I guess it was already on different types of peer-to-peer peer-to-peer models of technology.
well, I was more into federated, to be honest,
Okay.
to federated protocols and software, because we had peer-to-peer, but it was more like BitTorrent for sharing, and the peer-to-peer solutions that were for out there for building applications were not really awesome. But in federated protocols, federated infrastructure, we saw potential there because we could have benefits of centralized platforms using the frameworks, the development frameworks and stuff like that from there, but with strong interoperability, so there is no, let's say, central overlord controlling the ecosystem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we try to build stuff to facilitate the development of federated collaborative applications.
Do you have any examples of like a type of federated application?
Email.
Okay. Classic.
Email is federated, right? And we all use it. Doesn't matter where you have your account. You can have even your local server. You can have it at work. You can have it on one of the huge platforms. And we can always communicate. You give me whatever at whatever, and we can communicate because servers are interoperable with each other, and we can communicate. And there is no central overlord controlling all the ecosystem. Doesn't matter how big Gmail is, they cannot read all the emails that are sent everywhere, right? There will be always, I don't know, Proton Mail, geeks sending rise up emails, and those emails are not in Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, whatever.
But what about like the NSA? Would the NSA still be able to be?
Well, then we get into encryption and
Very
other stuff, because it's true that email is not as it was done so many decades ago, right? So it doesn't have secure security within the protocol, or at least not really hard security. So then, but we can create new protocols. We can develop new federated protocols with similar ideas, right?
You could also build on top of email, I guess, to make it more secure in certain ways. To a limit.
You could to a limit, exactly, because then you are not if Gmail doesn't comply with your protocol, then so many people will not use it, right? So
yeah,
it has limitations, but still, I mean, back in the day, we saw potential there. Today, it's true that having so many tests out there that have been a failure in practice, I'm more skeptical over the potential success of federated platforms over decentralized ones. For example, Gmail, when they started providing a chat service, they joined XMPP and Jabber protocol because they were the minority while competing with Messenger, with Microsoft Messenger. But in the moment that they become an important player, they dropped the protocol and interoperability. So all of us that were using that, I mean, XMPP to communicate with others, well, had problems now making interoperable applications with Gmail.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Is that when you started thinking more about peer-to-peer, I guess?
Well, I mean, first we tried to do some stuff, like SwellRT is one of the backend as a service and development framework that we built for, I mean, on top of actually some technology, open source technology by Google, that was Google Wave, that became eventually Apache Wave. We tried to build on top of that protocol that was kind of an email 2.0, incompatible with email, just rethinking the concept. And we tried to build on top of that. We were, I don't know, successful to extent, and eventually we gave the IP to the Apache Foundation as part of the Apache Wave project. But I mean, when Apache adopting the software was of course a success, but didn't grow as much as we had hoped.
Right.
And eventually blockchain, Ethereum, and IPFS, not only blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this new generation peer-to-peer technologies opened up the decentralization ecosystem way more than federated technologies ever could.
Yeah. I have to say, like, definitely for me as well, when Bitcoin was out, I wasn't really that keen on it. It didn't feel like it was solving any. I mean, it was attempting to solve a problem, but from a particular point of view, it didn't really make all that much sense. But then I guess with the composability of smart contracts and like that idea of smart contracts, I think the light bulb sort of goes off a little bit more on what you're able to do, and you have more design choices than you do with Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, is like, nope, just 21 million or however much, just you're only able to transact and you have to do it this way. So yeah, I can say for the same for me, it was Ethereum that sort of was a light bulb moment. But so if we talk about, so your project today now is peer-to-peer models. That's, I think, the biggest project that you're working on at the moment. Is that correct?
Yep.
And could you explain a bit more what are the goals of peer-to-peer models and what you guys hope to achieve? I know you guys have received already quite some money from the European Research Council. So you guys have funds, and I think I've seen every once in a while you guys are maybe looking for some potential grad students to help out. So maybe someone listening might be interested in knowing more about peer-to-peer models.
Sure. So the way we see it, well, I mean, we focus on the collaborative economy mostly. And we mean by that the internet today has a lot of people belonging to communities that are whose interaction is mediated by a platform, right? And they collaborate, they share stuff, they work together, and yet the platform is always the intermediary. So we see three main problems there. So first one, the infrastructure issue, in which the owner of the infrastructure, the one that deployed the software, that controls where the servers that are deployed and whatever, well, they are built with centralized technologies. This means that in order to scale, you have to deal with more and more people. Your poor servers and your poor software has to scale to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of interactions. And that's very costly. So you are forced to monetize or die of success. If you are forced to monetize, then you have to monetize what you have, that is typically the user data. And then we have all the troubles of privacy, of these huge data hubs that are trying to use personalized advertisement and all this stuff, right? That I will not get into because we are more or less all familiar with these issues. But I would say that regardless if you are a very good entrepreneur that wants to do it somewhere else, the way the infrastructure works, it's very difficult to do it in other ways. You don't need to be an evil Mark Zuckerberg to do it wrong. You can, because the pressure of monetization is so big that if you want to grow, if you want to give service while keeping your centralized service, it's very difficult not to monetize what you have. And this derives into immediate problems. There is a power imbalance between the owners of the infrastructure and the communities of users. So regardless of how many scandals the platforms suffer, like Uber or Facebook, I mean, the users have no voice because they are typically governed by a corporate structure, right?
Mm.
And but when we talk about Walmart having a corporate structure and having consumers buying and having no voice, this makes more sense from the classical approach. But when you are YouTube, where you are just an empty shell where the users create all that you are monetizing, well, you don't ask the Walmart consumers to take the food to the supermarket, right?
Yeah.
So you are asking all the users to provide all the value, and yet you give them no voice and no power whatsoever, right? And of course, the third problem is the economic issue. You don't only give them, don't give them decision-making power. You also don't give them a penny, or sometimes you give them a bit, some pennies, like YouTubers. Okay, so the top of them can live with it, top 1%, but most of YouTubers cannot. Or the top 1% of Medium can live from what they are writing, most of them cannot, right?
Yeah.
So we have these issues that I see very related with decentralized infrastructure. So peer-to-peer models tries to answer the question of, can we build platforms in another way? Can we build platforms that do not rely on, but that by definition, by default, they don't rely on a centralized infrastructure? So by default, there is an open ecosystem in which you do not control all the ecosystem, you do not control all the user data, and users can move to other easily because you don't control all the layers, basically. Can we have platforms in which users have decision-making power, at least to some extent, on how the platform evolves? Can we have platforms in which the benefit is not concentrated, the profit is not concentrated just on the owners of the infrastructure, but also on the people that are participating, creating value, and so on, right? So we are researching this space and trying to respond to these platforms, obviously using blockchain and other decentralized technologies. I don't know if more or less covers the overall abstract approach, let's say.
Yeah, no, that is really interesting. Yeah, one of the things that sort of bothers me about like how reliant we are on centralized platforms is sometimes that I think it's something that hasn't been analyzed properly within like a political context sometimes. That's, Twitter basically makes the rules about how you communicate with each other on Twitter, and that how you're only allowed to use, however many characters. So it makes Twitter very like confrontational, because you have to get to the point within your one tweet. So you have to go. So everything sounds almost like an insult. When maybe like if you were in person, you would be saying things with a lot more nuance, and you would like, of course in person you have body language as well. So it's a bit, it's a more natural form of communication. And like Twitter is something like, it's very unnatural, but we all feel forced to sort of use it because it's this huge platform with so many people on it. So we have, we don't really have much of a choice, and we can't tell Twitter very much to, hey, can you change it? Instead, we just sort of complain that, oh, I hate using Twitter. That meme that always pops up, you're like, open up the Twitter app and like, be depressed. It's unfortunate that I feel like we're sort of missing the ball here, where we could be in a way seizing our own means of production, but in the form of social media maybe, to create the ways that we want to communicate with each other. And I feel like peer-to-peer model seems to be on that track of trying to explore, well, how do we do that? And how do we do it well?
Yeah, that's the struggle, right? I completely agree. I mean, that's why we say, code is not neutral. Code is very political. And user interfaces are very political. They have socio-political values embedded in them, regardless if the developer is aware or not. doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because they have a vision of the world and they will implement with that vision of the world. And they will prioritize certain things. And so why spend character? If you have to count your characters, why say thanks or please, right? It doesn't make sense because it's wasting characters of content.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. No, indeed. And even like one example I've been thinking about how it actually is like kind of really political is like dating applications, like Bumble is one of the dating applications, and you can put your political affiliation, but you can only put conservative and liberal. There's nothing else. You're either conservative or you're liberal, or like a centrist or something like that. Like, you know, so there's an ideology behind the code in the product design, which is pretty funny. That what I've noticed is that P2P Models seems to be one of the largest projects that is explicitly exploring blockchain for some type of social good. And I mentioned earlier, you guys received quite a lot of funding from Europe from that. So I'm curious why you think peer-to-peer models seems to be one of the few that's doing it. Of course, you know, probably because, you know, cryptocurrency gives a lot of money and you can like easily raise a bunch of funds and like start your own company and then da-da-da. But yeah, I'm curious why you think peer-to-peer models is one of the few, and if maybe there are any other projects that you're aware of that you would shout out as also being, I guess, looking at blockchain and decentralized technology from a social good lens.
So that's a very good question. In practice, the majority of the blockchain ecosystem follows within finance, right? I guess it's normal. The Bitcoin was the first application of the technology. The boom of cryptocurrencies is there, right? And cannot be ignored, especially by the finance world. It's especially threatening or disrupting, like with the banking, financial sectors. So they are the ones investing most on it as well. So it makes sense that, and now with DeFi trend, it's more of the same, basically, more financial applications. But also because blockchain is a very mature technology in practice. It has not that many years, to be honest. And when we talk about social networks have been decades here, way before Facebook, right? But blockchain has not been decades here.
Yeah.
Well, Bitcoin has 1 decade to count.
Yeah.
But and in practice, even though there is a lot of funding moving blockchain applications, in practice, blockchain is very good for startups, very good for research projects, but we don't have large-scale applications, successful applications of blockchain outside of finance. We don't have them. In fact, this question that you made, it was very interesting for us to explore. And we were hired by the European Commission in a separate contract from P2P Models to explore that, to map the ecosystem of blockchain for social good. And we did a mapping of the initiatives that we found, and we found 130 that, I mean, discarding vaporware, discarding just white papers or ICOs that were a failure or stuff like that. No. We focused on stuff that has real users, that has pilots running, right? So I invite everyone to check out the report, because we have there plenty of very interesting projects. You can Google scanning the European ecosystem of distributed ledger technologies for social and public good.
I can put the link in the description. So
that would be good. Probably searching for DLT for social good, you can find it.
Yeah.
But yeah. it's. I was very happy with the report, and it's a great work from the Joint Research Center from the European Commission, together with our work and some others.
What were some of the things that you found?
Well, we found that innovation is not only driven by startups. There were like a 30% of nonprofits, which was very interesting. We found that there was really a lot of European initiatives, which is very interesting.
As compared to maybe like American initiatives or something.
I mean, the thing is that many from that started from America have moved to Switzerland, so that
yeah, okay, yeah.
so that makes them
To Zug.
Yeah, Zug is attracting a lot. So anyway, we were not only looking for things that were based on Europe, but also related to Europe in some way. So that expanded a bit more. And well, we saw things that we expected, like the Ethereum was the most famous, what was most popular public blockchain, Hyperledger the most popular private one. But we were shocked about the huge diversity around that. It was very interesting that a lot of sectors beyond finance, a lot of fields, plenty of countries, and plenty of open source software. And sadly, way too many white male geeks, but that was also expected, sadly.
Yeah. It's, when you define social good, because what type of definition did you guys use to find those projects?
We were fuzzy there. I mean, we were flexible, of course. We were looking for projects that state that they want explicitly that they want to achieve some kind of social impact. Being social impact understood in many ways. I mean, it could be helping public services from a state. It could be being more inclusive. It could be caring about the environment. It could be multiple things understood broadly, let's say. We have some inclusive criteria, selection criteria. Sorry, I mean, everything is in the report. I probably wouldn't get very scientific.
Okay, fair. So I'm really interested in hearing your perspective about this because you have so much technological experience as well as political experience in terms of activism. Like, why do you think the left should be interested in peer-to-peer technology like blockchain? Especially considering your background, I would hope that people would really appreciate your opinion on that.
I do have mixed feelings with the technology, I have to say. And there are so many libertarians in the field. Right?
Tell me about it.
Yeah. Still, there are a lot of people that are, let's say, social democrat, libertarian-ish.
Yeah.
Right?
I get what you mean. Yeah, hard to define.
So I mean, which I guess I'm fine with it. It's very postmodern, post-label, whatever. So I do think that the technology has some aspects that are very, for example, so many of the blockchain projects try to solve new problems, creating new currencies, solve social problems, creating new currencies and new markets, as if markets can solve social problems like that, right? Well, sometimes markets work. I will not deny that. I'm completely okay with that notion that sometimes market help, but sometimes they don't, and often they don't. And efficient markets are an exception rather than the rule. So we shouldn't expect that can work in every context in any way, right? At the same time, and also the blockchain has some individualistic notions, and it gives power to the token or to the token holder, and that may push for giving more power to those with more tokens and stuff like that, and relies on a mining mechanism, especially with proof of work, but also with proof of stake to some extent, in which, well, big players have more to say. And yet, it's helping to decentralize power. It's helping to create logically centralized but structurally decentralized projects in which we can get benefits of having one place to go, and yet there is not one controller, which we didn't have before, not as such. It makes visible things that were not that visible before. So it visibilizes, for example, reproductive work or maintenance work. Or if we are making a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization with smart contracts and whatever, and we want to reward with tokens the work that every person is doing for the community, then we have to get into the details of which types of work people are doing. Not only the productive work, but also reproductive work, also organizational aspects, also caring or emotional labor or whatever, and give it value and visibilize it in the community, and being inclusive with whomever is working. You know what I mean? It forces collectives and organizations to discuss things that are typically under the table, which I think is positive. Maybe they don't put forward the best solutions. Yeah, that's way too common, but they were not before either. At least now we are pushing them to talk about it, and it gives me hope for experimentation. And I think this is the key here. It opens the box for experimentation, experimenting new ways of handling, of deploying platforms, of collaborating online, of rewarding work. And that's super interesting, because there are a lot of people saying it's true that people that concentrate most tokens shouldn't have the most decision making. So let's do quadratic voting. No, let's do this other models of governance that try in practice to reduce the power of the elites. And it's like, fuck, why don't you do this in other platforms, please?
Yeah, in
right?
real life.
or ideally in real life, right? But these questions of let's distribute wealth are being discussed in DAOs in the ecosystem today. And it's like, okay, I mean, welcome then.
Yeah, it is very socialistic.
But it is. But in practice, even if it's libertarians talking about it, you know what I mean?
That's a good thing, maybe.
That's a very good thing. I can perfectly discuss with libertarians as long as they are open-minded. I have no problem with that. And I think it's good when projects have a wide base ideologically wise, so we have people from different, not only diverse in terms of gender or race or ability or class or whatever, but also of ideology. It would be fantastic if we can convince people not from the left of doing things of reaching agreements and pushing forward technologies and platforms that benefit us all, right? It would be awesome.
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this episode so far, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share with a friend, and join the crypto leftist community on Discord or Reddit, which you can find links to in the show notes. If you're enjoying the interview or find the content I make important, you could pitch into my efforts starting at $3 a month on patreon.com/theblockchainsocialist to help me out and join the newest patrons like Nicholas, Luke, and Andy. Any amount really helps since making this stuff isn't free in terms of money or time. And as a patron, you'll get a shout out on an episode like I just did and access to Patreon exclusive contents like Q&A episodes where you can submit and vote on questions you'd like me to answer, and I'll give my thoughts in roughly 20 minutes. Of course, I'll still be making free content like this interview to help spread the message that blockchain does not need to be used to further entrench capitalist exploitation if we put our efforts into it. So if that message resonates with you, I hope you'll consider helping out. Also, if you're interested in what's going on lately at Breadchain, be sure to check out the first blog post that was published last week, as it goes into more detail about the project that I've been working on with a few others in the community. Thanks again for listening, and let's get back to the interview with Samer. It's been really interesting for me keeping track of the Ethereum space, how important or how much more they're emphasizing public goods. Like, it's a huge topic in the sort of Ethereum DAO, this specific like libertarian social democrat weird space that you're talking about. There's a lot of talk about public goods. I can criticize their definition of public good. I don't think it's like necessarily always correct in how they want to think about it, and sometimes it's a little bit like wishy-washy how they want to go about it and how they define it. But at least they're talking about public good, which is, I mean, yeah, no libertarian talks about that otherwise, unless it's like it's something bad that the government does, So it's certainly opened a lot. There's a lot of socialistic, not socialism, but socialistic elements to it that I think if the left were there, we would be able to have a bit more pressure to like press that button a little bit further to push those people who are maybe already in these positions, or to create, to have other people who are socialists in these type of positions to sort of push for that vision rather than the usual libertarian vision of thinking of markets to try and fix every problem.
In fact, we have tried to do, we have to understand that even though peer-to-peer models is a very large project research-wise, it's a very small compared with titans that have been successful in getting tens of millions in an ICO, right? We cannot compare with those. And yet we have tried to introduce our view that is very commons oriented. So we talk more about the commons, more about the public good, but because I think it's very loaded, the word of commons, positively loaded.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't use the word public, which is also, I think, good for attracting other people. But also there are awesome works on the commons space, like the Nobel Prize of Economics, Elinor Ostrom, proving that commons local management is more efficient than the state or the market, right? So that's awesome. That's an empirical result that we want to get behind, right? Because it's like you give a community management over a common good, a public good, and you respect these simple rules, that is the principles of the governance principles of Ostrom, and it will be more efficient than if a private company does it with a market approach, or with a central administration trying to manage it from a public approach. And we can apply this to blockchain very easily. It's not that difficult. And I think there are some projects that are already going there, right?
The common stack is
exactly
one of them, of course. But yeah, there's one of my criticisms of like the word public good. I mentioned this in a previous episode, but when you say public good, when you say good, you're thinking that it's already a positive thing, but it's not necessarily like a public something that is public isn't always necessarily good, or like how it's being used is necessarily good. So like her name is Annalise Milano. She's doing her PhD looking at public goods and blockchain, and so she preferred using public things, which I think is maybe probably a bit better of a description, because it's more neutral, and there are things that are publicly available but are used for maybe bad ends, or like open source projects being used by companies to profit off of, it's a common example. But yeah,
I see your point.
So yeah, that was a great answer. I know some of the other things that peer-to-peer models has been doing is looking at the DAO space, because the DAO space, I think, is an explicit need to deal with this issue of the commons, and like how you deal when you gather a bunch of people together and you pool all these resources. You have to know what you're going to do with it, and most of the people in this DAO space are sort of at least unconsciously sort of against the against wage slavery, of like thinking about, we're not creating a DAO that is just like your standard, corporate structure. So they need to build something else. So they now need to go back to the root of what a corporation does, and think about how do we distribute these resources. But I know you guys have done a lot of analytics into that DAO space. Some like 3 bigger platforms called the DAO Analyzer.
Yeah, this is a research line that I have with my colleague Javier Arroyo. We call it this. It's a smaller. We have a bit of funding from the Spanish ministry. We call it Chain Community because it's exploring communities on blockchain.
Mm.
And we have been doing mostly data science on the ecosystem of. We have looked at mostly DAO Stack and DAO House rather than Aragon, although we have also looked a bit on Aragon because, well, for technical reasons, they were using the graph, so it was much easier directly pinching extracting the data. And yeah, we have built a dashboard, Youssef El Fakir to thank for, that he developed, a dashboard to try to visualize some metrics and graphs on how these DAOs evolve over time and how even the DAO members could go and look for their DAO in the main platforms and see how they are doing. What are the different, well, for now, a few metrics, but eventually we would like to grow it as much as we did with another effort that we did with wiki communities. We explored, especially focused on the inequality of participation in other types of online communities that are wiki communities. So we explored thousands of wikis and we built a dashboard to show them, Wikicron.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's really interesting because one of the, I guess, sort of issues with a DAO is that these are organizations within a digital space, and we don't live in a digital space. So there are things that happen that are sort of a bit invisible that you may not actually see unless you're like constantly scanning the blockchain to see what's going on. But if you're able to build a type of dashboard that is getting all of this, visualize all the data that's being accrued into the blockchain, you can probably derive some insights that better inform the members of those communities on what is actually happening inside of their communities, which is, I think, a bit of a blind spot in the DAO space at the moment. Is that, everything is recorded, but everything isn't human readable.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are some tools that they can use that, for example, Aragon provides for understanding a bit what's going on, and yet it's too geeky right now. I think also there is very interesting research to be done on not only showing the data, but using that data to test if the governance models are working or not. Like we took the holographic consensus from DAO Stack, and that also Aragon has implemented, but it's the default governance model of DAO Stack. And we checked if it's true that it facilitates, if it's working facilitating governance for large organizations, because that's the idea. And at least with the preliminary data, it does work, which is very interesting. It does work. The staking predicts the end result and the interest, and is aligned with the interest of the.
How does holographic consensus work? Maybe you can explain a little bit.
So basically, it's a prediction market on top of. So very quickly. Typically, if you want everyone to vote on every proposal, if we all fit in a room, it's easy. But the more it grows, well, it's kind of complicated, right? So if you still expect a voting majority, I mean, if you expect 90% majority, it grows it scales terribly. Even if you expect 51% majority, it still scales terribly because you need everyone to be checking all the proposals in order to be voting for each proposal, if yes or no for each, right? So what they do after a certain size, you can use, well, you can use it in any case, I think. But the idea is people could vote, stake, uh, like a prediction market. Oh, this new proposal, I'm sure that if the community reads it, it will pass. No, this proposal for sure it will not pass if the community, right? So on this, based on that, the a proposal can be boosted, so only a smaller percentage of people uh, read it. If there is a lot of stake on it, it will pass eventually. So if there is a lot of, if the prediction market says yes, this for sure will pass, it can be eventually boosted with certain percentages and certain calculations or whatever. So people, not everybody in the community, not the 51% need to vote for it to pass. So we wanted to check if it's working, basically. If it does work, if the community is basically the amount of proposals is filtered by this prediction market in practice. Giving power to the prediction market is dangerous because, of course, you are giving power to people that are token holders. And yet, well, if their values are aligned with the values of the community, well, it can benefit, it can do a service, and it's still the community can always vote them against.
So is the stake is meant to move it up the list of proposals? Okay. Yeah. And so if a lot of people are predicting that it's going to pass, a lot of people will be like, okay, then I guess I'll pass it. That probably signals that it's a good proposal and I don't need to go into that much detail to read it or something.
I mean, you can go as much detail as you want, but the idea is that you don't need a 51% majority. Maybe with a 30% positive votes, it would pass.
Okay. So based on maybe your research on these decentralized communities and organizations, are there any sort of clear implications in terms of like benefits and drawbacks maybe for using a decentralized for creating a decentralized organization as opposed to like a centralized organization? I mean, there is this like, whenever I think about this, I sort of think about like the usual inter-left conflict between like anarchists and communists or something like that. But I think part of the conflict, I feel like, is that sometimes we don't have the tools and we don't know when to use a specific type of organization. And I don't know if it's necessarily helpful to think about, oh, we always need to use a centralized or we always need to use a decentralized. If we are materialists, then we should think about the situation that we're in and which one would better answer that problem. But I'm curious from you if you found any sort of clear benefits and drawbacks, maybe.
So I would differentiate here when we're talking about technologies or centralization and decentralization in general, right? I think in general, decentralization is good in the sense that there is no concentration of power or money or whatever in a few hands. So if we decentralize, it's typically better. If we centralize privilege in a few kinds of people, that's bad. If we centralize power in a few in a few people, that's bad. In a few companies, in a few states, we typically prefer to decentralize.
Could we think about it as being bad because similar to centralized organizations, maybe like having that single points of failure almost, where if the people at the top all of a sudden decide to do something or make a mistake, then it's sort of like, well, they were the only ones that had all the power, and they made a mistake, so it's a point of failure. Is that sort of how maybe we could think of it?
I mean, there are many ways. I was trying to simplify a lot. Okay, I was being very, very reductionist, of course. We have the typical dilemma of the what's better, a benevolent dictator or a democracy, right? Democracy, the people are all the time discussing and whatever, and don't know who will win, or the benevolent dictator that is thinking of the people and whatever. Yeah, but in the dictatorship, you don't tend to choose who's the dictator. That's the whole point of it. And someone that seems benevolent in certain context, certain moment, can be not that benevolent tomorrow in a sort of other. So having more democratic, more decentralized, more balances of power, it's typically seen as good for inclusiveness, for inequality, for centralization of power. It's related with the single point of failure thing, because if you depend on a single person or a single company or a single whatever, well, you have to trust them a lot, because either you align perfectly with this person's mind or you might be in trouble. While, of course, there are many models of decentralization of power. I am not saying that representative democracies are the best at all. I'm just saying that, at least it's decentralized. At least there are multiple actors that, probably I would try to experiment more with models of governance, so we don't depend on the typical party-based democracy with a few parties competing for power, because I don't think that is super healthy, that approach, or fantastic in many ways. But I'm just saying that typically we see the centralization of positive force because of these issues that centralization tends to have a lot. At the same time, if we are talking about another scale, and this institution that is controlling this resource is an assembly, is organized as an assembly, is organized including all the voices, has rules that are hearing a lot of people, including the voices of a lot of people, the representatives or delegates, if any, rotate and whatever, well, then maybe it's not that bad to have a centralized institution managing that, right? So when I'm not a blockchain maximalist, so I don't think that everything should be decentralized, everything should be on the blockchain, or everything, all the technology. I think that depends on the use case.
I call myself a socialism maximalist.
That works. Good. So yeah, I think that there are many use cases that we don't want to use blockchain. Why my health data should be in a blockchain or even in IPFS? I don't want that. Even if it's encrypted, the encryption will be broken in 10 years, and what happens with my health data? It will be public. I don't trust the encryption enough. You know what I mean? So there are use cases that do not make sense, at least not for now, to rely on decentralized technologies. And yet, this helps to decentralize power, so we can experiment with models combining decentralized aspects, centralized aspects, and explore there, experiment. And again, I don't think that we should seek one solution for everything.
Yeah.
I think depends on the context, depends on the model, different things required. Because even if this institution, social center, whatever, is centralized for managing a space or a neighborhood resource or whatever, maybe they do want to have a decentralized platform to coordinate with other social centers or with other initiatives that are related to them, right? So
do you think the left maybe needs to be a little bit more decentralized? Sometimes I think I don't know, there's a bit like, I feel like we are sometimes dependent on, like, if we think about the US, as soon as Bernie Sanders lost, I mean, everyone was depressed, everyone on the left in America, because we depended so much on this one guy, like flying through the eye of a needle and getting into the presidency. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. And I think it broke a lot of people's brains, to be honest, sometimes. But yeah, I guess, do you have thoughts on that?
I would differentiate between representative democracy politics from the left. I think the left is already very decentralized. We have a lot of initiatives. We have a lot of no, but seriously, we have a huge ecosystem of initiatives. I don't think that is very well. It doesn't work very well together. We discuss and fight internally way too much, and there are also many egos, and then many splits and constant inner fighting, which is not awesome. As a self-criticism,
I saw this meme or something, or like, I mean, the people who hate leftists the most are other leftists.
Exactly. So, which is sad, right?
Yeah.
Because typically we see the right much more aligned, much more disciplined, much more falling under one flag whenever it's convenient.
Yeah.
And we are very critical and we are very proud of it, and then we are not very flexible, at least not as much as we claim generally. Of course, I'm generalizing here. So I do think that the left is very centralized. I do think as well that representative democracy and parties force us towards centralization, and we are not that very good there. So we need to personalize in order to attract the masses, or we need to one simple message to attract people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's what works on TV, or it's what works on a debate in TV when you are competing with other candidates in a primary or stuff like that. It's just a bit desperating, because we do have multiple phases right now with AOC, right, reaching the parliament, or not only her, but more diverse voices from progressive backgrounds, or having different people even if they are not that progressive, but still bringing interesting voices like Elizabeth Warren, right? Or trying to bring alternatives. People that don't like Bernie, that could have other voices to hear. Well, I think that there are stuff there. It's just that we seek one voice, because regardless if we had a lot, we need only one running for the election, or we need only right? So I think it's different what we have than what it's required by the strong constraints of party democracy and representative democracy, especially in the US.
Yeah, it's sort of because the state makes these rules towards centralization that it sort of, it rubs off on us as well. And it's difficult to get out of that thinking, because the state has so much power over politics, of course.
I know, of course.
Yeah. So I did want to ask you this question, because I know there tends to be quite a few people who are in academia who listen to my podcast, I've noticed. But one of the projects that one of your PhD students started is called Decentralized.science. So I was wondering, explain that project a little bit, because I think it's a pretty interesting way of decentralized peer review.
This was incubated within P2P Models, and eventually was a spin-off from the project. So it was part of us, and now it's an independent enterprise led by my PhD student, by Amber.
So Peer-to-Peer Models is sort of like an incubator as well sometimes? So a Y Combinator type of thing?
I wish.
With less money, maybe?
Kind of. It's the only think that we incubated so far. So I would have loved that we do more of those. But right now, yeah, they have managed to attract independent funding. They have their own group. They have won several grants, and they are working with clients already, co-designing and experimenting on the process of open science. So I don't know if the audience is very familiar with how science works, but it follows a lot this approach of platforms owning everything. So when I'm an author of a research paper, I submit a paper, I don't get paid. I often have to pay for getting published. When some reviewers will review my paper, my article, and give me feedback, but the reviewers are not paid either. It's volunteering because it's good for their CVs. The editor that chooses reviewers is often not paid at all because it's good for the CV of the person. So in practice, who's making money here? Well, the publishers that have the PDFs of the publications.
Elsevier.
And basically, Elsevier it's the most typical example, right? But also Springer or others. And they build paywalls behind the articles, and universities have to pay for accessing the papers of their own researchers, which is a total nonsense, right?
It's crazy.
So there have been interesting open access initiatives. So
Sci-Hub, including maybe.
So yeah, I mean, Sci-Hub is criminalized typically by science
journals,
status quo, let's say. Because Sci-Hub is like, okay, let's do piracy and fuck it, right? Which I totally support. It's on the side.
Extremely admirable what she's doing over there.
I mean, and
a huge communist.
Right? She's yeah, it's true. That's true. So the Alexandra Elbakian.
Yeah.
So the idea is that, I mean, of course, Sci-Hub plays its role, and at the same time, we need to attract institutions to do it in another way, right? So we believe that we can rely on decentralized infrastructure to do it in another way. For example, papers to be on the open by default. So they rely on they are uploaded to decentralized infrastructure. So then the owner of the infrastructure doesn't have the power to co-opt it. But also the reviewers make the reviews openly as open peer reviews. So it's public, the content of the review. It's not only private for the author, which has issues, and yet more and more journals are adopting some open reviews, especially more recent modern ones, and even Nature is experimenting there. So, but if the reviews are open, then we can rate the quality of the reviews, and we can give reputation to these reviewers, and we can differentiate with the quality of a reviewer versus other reviewers, or which reviewers ship the review early and which take 3 months, right? Or which ones give feedback that is crappy and which one give very good feedback to improve the work. So then the journals can access to a pool of reviewers that can be rewarded for their work in exchange of quality reviews and being fast and being fast delivery. The idea is that even me as an author, sometimes I depend on of an article being published for example, an accreditation or a position that I want to apply for or whatever. But sometimes when you submit to a journal, they take 1 year, 2 years, even 3 years waiting for maybe they tell you that they reject it, but you don't know,
Yeah.
Or maybe they give you feedback, you send a new article and they don't reply and you don't, it's desperate.
Yeah.
So I would, very frequently, I would pay for it to finish the process in 3 months. And well, why not that money can go to a reviewer to do the money fast, the process fast, right? So what decentralized science right now is doing is experimenting with this. Which kind of rewards? How the journal would what's interesting for the journal? What's interesting for the reviewer? Let's experiment with different types of price of rewards, different types of monetary and non-monetary rewards, and how can they mix, and which is the reputation algorithm that we're playing here, and how can what I mean, and what are the metrics that should we use, this kind of stuff, which is very interesting to be honest.
Yeah. The scientific journal world to me is like the perfect example of how the market has messed up, how inefficient markets are.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a non-regulated market, they tend to concentration way too often, right?
Yeah. And whenever I learned that, like even if you buy an article from a journal, the author gets nothing.
Yeah,
it's insane to you think you're buying it because like, oh, thank you to the scientist needs to like making a little bit of extra money off of his papers at least. But no, it's just going to these journals who all they do is put a paywall. When 90% of the time the research is being funded by your tax dollars, and then you still have to pay for it again and you want to read it. It seems like a very good space to experiment with these type of governance structures, and potentially, I mean, if you need to, you could make use blockchain in some sort of way in that.
Yeah, that's the idea. That's what Amber is trying to do there.
So it's governance around a digital commons using blockchain. Like it's a real, maybe if anyone's listening and is still skeptical, like it's a real example of how it can be used for sort of communal governance and joint decision making, let's say. So maybe to finish off the interview, you can let us know where or how people can keep up with you and what's going on with peer-to-peer models. Where should they go?
Well, we use Twitter, like you said. We cannot run away from from it. So the Twitter of peer-to-peer model is P2P Mod.
Yeah.
MOD. It's an abbreviation from peer-to-peer models. And my own Twitter is Samer, Samer P2P again. And we have a newsletter in the peer-to-peer models.eu from Europe, where people can subscribe to our newsletter if they're interested, or if they are if they think that there are some points of interest or potential ways of collaboration, please drop us an email. It's very easy to find my email in my website or in the peer-to-peer models general email. And if you Google Samer Hassan, you can find my research or my main website or whatever.
Yeah. You're quite high up on the Google rank.
Thanks.
All right, cool. Thanks. This has been really interesting. So thanks a lot, Samer. Yeah, let's stay in touch, and I'm really interested in seeing how peer-to-peer models develops.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure. Very interesting conversation.